Good morning to you, Joe Firmage. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Congratulations. What is the time in your surroundings now?
It's almost 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, it isn't that bad, no? Okay. I apologize for this very, very direct dialogue, but I do want to introduce you. First of all, I thank you for being able to attend to this conference, and when we got your message a fortnight ago that you were unable to be here in person, we were very disappointed, but we are very grateful for the technician or the efforts and the expenditures that you have of bringing this on satellite from California. And we are very pleased to welcome you and Tony Young, your Director of Public Affairs, being here present. He's doing a fantastic job. But
thank you very much, and I apologize for having to conduct this presentation over the satellite, but the various activities here in California just would not let me get to Europe at this time. But I will enjoy taking questions later from the audience after the presentation.
Thank you. For those of you who doesn't know Mr. Joe Firmage, let me introduce him. He's about 30 years. I'm not quite
29.
Sure. Under? In 1998, he founded the organization of International Space Sciences Organization, ISSO. But before I go further into these details, you were the successful owner and director of US Web, the world's largest enterprise of its kind. And he has written in his book, The Truth, in order for civilization to mature to the next level, we simply must reorient our self-perception of our place in the cosmos. You have founded an organization that shall contribute to better understanding and insight into the UFO issue, gravitation, and free energy, which has also been the issue during Stephen Greer's speech. The organization of Joe Firmage is planning to launch books, movies, interactive educational programs. He has written a book, The Truth, which presents UFO events and explanations during the last 50 years. And he says it is the time to tell the truth, and that President Clinton must admit that extraterrestrials have visited the Earth. We do look forward to hearing what you have to this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I'd like to share the perspective that I have with you today, and before we begin, I'd like to remind everybody that this is a process of ongoing discovery for all of us. As I wrote in the introduction to the draft of my book on the internet a year ago, this will be a process of eternal discovery, and I don't have all the answers, but I have several perspectives that I hope you find useful and illuminating. The title of my presentation today is called Evolving Ontology. And you will excuse the fact that the only language I know how to speak is English, so I hope the audience can keep up with the words that I use here. But the word ontology means the science of being. And one of the themes in my presentation today will be that our understanding of who and what we are has been continually evolving throughout modern human history. And in the past 100 years, in the 20th century, our knowledge of ourselves as we've learned our history through the study of science. Each discipline of science has told us new things about who we are and where we are in the cosmos. So the title of the presentation expresses the idea that our knowledge of ourselves will continue to evolve into the future, perhaps with some important new realizations spreading across the mind of humanity over the next few decades. So our discussion today will first touch upon history. How is it that we have come to the place that we are finding ourselves today? I'm going to discuss with you a few observations on significant shifts underway in science, shifts that are very relevant to the study of the unidentified flying object phenomenon. I'll discuss briefly what I call the matrix of ontology, which is a discussion of how science and religion are coming together in interesting new ways. And I will close with some thoughts about what life might be like in the third millennium if we're privileged enough to make the kind of discoveries that I believe that we can. So, where do we begin a discussion as broad-reaching as the science of being? Well, I think a natural point to begin is to look at the history of our species. The history of Homo sapiens obviously stretches back for hundreds of thousands or millions of years, depending upon where you draw the line of the emergence of our species. And it is very clear that the human being is an evolved being. The science of evolution is well demonstrated. In the geological record, we find evidence of a progression of animal form that has evolved its way through millions and millions of years. Now, many in the biology community will argue that this process is entirely random. It's a process of random influences from nature taking the human species through its evolutionary trajectory. There are others in the biological research community who will argue that something is missing from random selection, that purely random events cannot explain the wondrous complexity that makes advanced life what it is, that makes us what we are. I would hypothesize, and many other scientists have done so before, long before I, that the possible missing element from our understanding of evolution is intent. And we'll come back to this subject of intent later on in our discussion. But it is clear that science has informed knowledge of our ultimate creator. This is a very important concept to understand. But at the same time, science in the history of humanity is a relatively recent phenomenon. Spiritual traditions and religions have guided and informed human behavior for millennia. It's not hard to see how the traditions of respect for a higher power have influenced the course of human history. And let's not forget that there are other disciplines of experience and creativity that have influenced our history in profound ways. Art has expressed our vision of the future, and in advance of every major revolution in human thought, it seems to have been preceded by imagery in paintings, in carvings, and in our time, films, movies, and other expressions of future vision. In a sentence, over the past several thousand years, the community primate has become an individual explorer of the cosmos. 5,000 years ago, our ancestors were mainly living in huts and caves with the bare essentials of fire to warm and nourish ourselves through cooking and basics of agriculture. Today, our most advanced spacecraft are leaving the solar system. Our telescope in space is peering into the depths of the heavens, 15 billion years back in time to the origin of stars and galaxies. That's an amazing trajectory, and I believe it points somewhere, up and out. Let's talk for a moment further about some of these factors that have influenced the course of human history. Undeniably, one of the greatest influencing factors is religion. Let's examine very briefly how major traditions of respect for a higher power have influenced our collective behavior over the past several millennia. Buddhist traditions teach of the unity of all things. The Eastern philosophies, which are not as well understood here in the United States as they are elsewhere in the world, have for thousands of years taught us of the interconnectedness of all things, both animate, living systems and inanimate systems that support us, that we live upon. Hindu traditions have taught of a progression of order through time. One stage leading through a process of advancement to another. Judaism and the Hebrew tradition bound the idea of one God, monotheism, a very interesting concept, with a powerful ethical code. The Ten Commandments, of course, have had a profound influence on the course of human affairs, and to this day represent a very powerful system of belief for hundreds of millions, indeed billions of people. An offshoot of Judaism, of course, Christianity, personified God through a man and provided, if you will, an example for others to follow 2,000 years ago. And last and certainly not least, Muslim traditions, the faith of Islam, believed in the idea that many prophets represented the higher power. And in fact, unknown to many, traditions of Islam gave rebirth to science in advance of the Renaissance in Europe, within a faith that was originally compatible with the ideas and the aspirations of scientific knowledge. Now, it's important, however, to stress one obvious idea. Every tradition of faith has been institutionalized, and in so doing has carried forward both core truths but also fictions. As any discipline of self-discovery tends to do over time, the picture gets clearer and clearer and clearer as time goes on. An example that's particularly interesting to read and hear, a quote by John Calvin, an individual who had a significant influence on the religious beliefs and traditions of the past few hundred years. A quote, "If God had formed us of the stuff of sun or stars, then we might have said our beginning was honorable. But when someone is made of clay, who pays any attention to him? So who are we? We are all made of mud, and this mud is not just on the hem of our gown, or on the sole of our boots, or in our shoes. We are full of it. We are nothing but mud and filth, both inside and outside." Now, of course, we've learned an awful lot in the past few hundred years that takes us beyond that type of belief. Indeed, one of the most profound observations that has ever been expressed in the English language is, "We are star stuff." Of course, that was a quote of Carl Sagan many years ago before he died. Now, at the time of John Calvin, we humans, generally speaking, did not appreciate that we were on one small blue dot out of countless billions of possible blue dots that span the heavens. Only through the discoveries of science have we figured out how that small blue world fits into the grand scheme of the cosmos. In the time preceding Copernicus and Galileo, every one of the lights in the nighttime sky was a UFO, an unidentified flying object passing through the sky. The interesting thing that mystified your ancestors, of course, our ancestors, was that there were interesting patterns that some of these lights seemed to follow in the nighttime sky. This was a very deep mystery and the subject of speculations of mysticism and early science. It was through the absolute genius of Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and others that we came to understand that the Earth is not at the center of the universe. Indeed, the Earth orbits the Sun, as do other planets. Now, of course, I can't see the hands in the audience, but raise your hand if this was the image of the solar system that you were taught in school. I trust that, Tony, that we have pretty much unanimous agreement, right? Well, we're going to come back to this again because there are yet further refinements of this very basic image that can reveal some of the fascinating new insights that we are considering in our studies of physics. We'll come back to this image in a moment. Let's talk about science, the discipline that has helped more than any other to advance our knowledge of ourselves and where we fit in the cosmos. We have discovered staggering insights into the nature of all beings, living and not living, and how beings move and communicate with each other. This is what science has taught us. From this knowledge, largely in this century, the 20th century, we have engineered communication systems. We've engineered transportation, economics. 50 years ago, we began to automate logic, decision-making, and labor through robot and computing systems. We have begun to dramatically extend our lifespans through the wonders of biological knowledge and knowledge of healing. We have created a machine called modern civilization, which surrounds and sustains all of us together. In the past 50 years, we have come very close to the brink of self-destruction, as our knowledge of science has outpaced our appreciation of the importance of ethics and finding ways to live together in peace and harmony. We have stepped just back from that edge of self-destruction. Hopefully, we will continue to step further and further back from that dangerous apocalyptic precipice. In any case, these foundations have empowered us to learn through experience. In the past 100 years, we have learned things that simply could not be learned through abstract textbooks, but rather only through the pain and the joy of experience of these wondrous discoveries, advancements, dangers, and opportunities have we been able to truly appreciate what it means to live in a technological modern society. This is the gift of science. I believe that at the end of the 20th century we face a cusp. Across every discipline of experience we seem to be facing profound changes in the way we live. We have gained a glimpse of the creation process, and it has something to do with the notion of light. A popular hypothesis amongst scientists today is called the Big Bang hypothesis of creation, where it is said that 15 billion years ago, a gigantic explosion was somehow initiated that caused an expanding shell of energy to crystallize into the galaxies and stars that, of course, we are made of. Whether you believe that the Big Bang hypothesis is correct or not, virtually all accounts of creation have something to do with this this substance, this mysterious substance called light. We have discerned the human genome, and we have begun to use that knowledge to literally design forms of life. Literally this year, there are several initiatives underway around the world to gain our first draft sketch of the genes that make a human being, the programming that makes a living form such as we. What an awesome power. And what amazing thoughts to think of where that knowledge will lead us 100 years from now. In root disciplines of science, we've seen the evidence of the ability to engineer space-time, as it's often said, for purposes of new forms of energy and propulsion. This point is very close to the heart of most of us in the pursuit of better understanding and appreciation of the UFO phenomenon. Clearly, if UFOs are real, humans have a lot of learning to do on questions of energy and propulsion. Something that's particularly close to my heart, in the past few thousand days, a new communications medium has begun to spread around the planet, connecting human beings many to many and one to one. The Internet is very much like the mind of humanity, a vehicle through which every connected human being can converse with any other individual or group, ultimately with essentially no limits on what can be exchanged, what ideas can be shared. This gives the human species the opportunity to act as one in a way that has never before been possible. We have seemingly observed, glimpsed astonishing new powers of consciousness. Not new powers, these powers have been with us, been with life on this planet, seemingly since the genesis of life, but only recently have we begun to appreciate the true dimensions of the power of human consciousness. There are startling observations that have been made repeatedly in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere around the world that suggest to us that in some manner we can perceive information non-locally, across distance and across time. These are very mysterious observations for which we do not seem to have physics theories to explain. They're often rejected, like the UFO phenomena is rejected, because of the fact that we cannot explain them. Of course, such rejection seems to me to be the height of dogma, shall we say. When our theories cannot explain our observations, it's likely not the case that our observations are defective, but rather our theories are incomplete. Both physics and cosmology, physics being the study of the nature of matter and energy, and cosmology, the history of the universe in which we live, both of with new observations in both of these disciplines that force us to reconsider our notions of how nature works and how it is that we came to be. Here is an interesting slide that attempts to describe visually the importance of these new observations in physics and cosmology. I call this the cone of sanctioned reality. Call it the cone of reality, if you will. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see the vertex of the cone. And as the vertex grows, the cone gets wider and wider and wider. Well, at the vertex of this cone, we have an angle. And the angle you can think of as being defined by our cosmology observations, the observations of stars and galaxies, and also by our physics theories. In other words, how do they work? How do stars, galaxies, planets, human beings actually work? And what happens over time is that our physics theories and our cosmology observations tell us more and more and more about nature, and we can explain more and more and more. So let me ask you a rhetorical question. How wide was the cone of sanctioned reality during the time of Galileo? If Galileo, as I believe another speaker had mentioned in an earlier presentation, if Galileo had been confronted with a StarTAC cellular phone with the Motorola logo on it, what do you think that he would have thought of such a wondrous piece of technology? Clearly, that type of technology was not within Galileo's cone of sanctioned reality. So what science does is teach us more and more over time about astrophysics, geochemistry, and ecobiology, the stars and galaxies, the planets, and the life forms, such as human beings. Now, whatever is outside the cone of reality is outside the cone of explanation. So what we are confronted with as an audience engaged in the study of a mysterious, undefined phenomena, the phenomena of UFOs. We are studying a domain of observations that fall outside of existing theories of science, and therefore many scientists choose to ignore the data. But who is to say that future discoveries in science will not give us an understanding, widen the cone of sanctioned reality, to include possibilities that today might be rejected? I believe that new discoveries, in fact, are underway in physics that will ultimately yield to a clear understanding of the UFO phenomenon. Let's talk for a moment or two about the problems in physics and cosmology today. For those of you who aren't familiar with these disciplines of science, bear with me here, because these are important issues that fundamentally bear on the question of UFOs, their nature, and our future with respect to them. Perhaps the most important single physics point that I would make today is that experiments have demonstrated in the past 20 years that space, or space-time, whatever it is that stars and galaxies move around in, is not nothingness. Space is not empty. It is, in fact, a medium of intensely powerful energy. Now, this is a fundamentally different concept than the foundations upon which 20th century physics are presently built. Unbeknownst to most of the public, and indeed many scientists, debates raged back and forth for centuries on the question of the nature of space. And with the introduction of the special theory of relativity at the beginning of the 20th century, it was declared that space was indeed empty and contained nothing but particles bouncing off of each other. Well, there are various experiments that have been conducted in the 1980s and 1990s that suggest that that idea is simply incomplete. Therefore, our two fundamental physics theories, the theory of the atom, how the atom works, and the theory of how atoms move, are roughly successful, but are in fundamental conflict with each other. If you ask an honest physicist today, he or she will tell you that the theory of general relativity, the theory of our present theory of how atoms move, and the theory of quantum mechanics, our theory of how atoms work, are in conflict with each other. Therefore, one or both of these theories is substantially deficient. A deficient physics theory, of course, is what we're looking for if we're hoping one day to explain the unexplainable UFO phenomenon. Most scientists who study physics will tell you that both of these theories are presumed to be approximations of a more basic theory that we do not yet have. That more basic theory, which we seek, will likely define matter as bodies of forces and space as a medium conveying forces between bodies. It's a seemingly very simple concept. Matter is the body of force, and space is the wave system that moves bodies of force around. It's a philosophically very interesting notion to think about. So people say, all right, Joe, well, that sounds all very interesting and intellectual, but I never studied physics. What the hell does it mean? There are actually simple pictures that can describe what our previous view of physics looked like compared to our emerging speculations of what more basic physics theories will look like. So I promised you that we'd come back to this diagram of the solar system. All of us, of course, were taught in school that the basic idea that the planets rotate around the sun, and it forms this notion of orbits. Well, what we are in fact studying in physics suggests that another picture might be more effective in describing the motions of planetary bodies. And it's this image. For those of you who have studied astronomy, you'll note that not only do the planets go around the sun, but the sun and all of the planets are moving around the galaxy, the Milky Way. So when you combine those two motions together, what are the paths followed by the planets? Well, the path is a helix, a vortex, a spiral. And the inner planets rotate in this spiral, this helical pattern, more rapidly than do the outer planets, which move more slowly. So the basic idea that we're seeing is that it's possible to interpret the motions of the planets as helix within helix within helix within helix, a very interesting shape to think about. So yes, we do believe that it's possible to think about new notions in physics and actually visualize new ways of looking at very basic concepts of science. Let's shift our focus to other questions of science. Now, the discipline of science that studies the origin of the universe and the origin of galaxies and stars and such is called cosmology. And cosmology has entered a period of substantial confusion and disarray. And there's a reason for this. The Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe is subject to increasing criticism from philosophers. The simple questions include, well, what happened before the Big Bang? What is the universe expanding into? Can we really say that time had a beginning? What sense does it make to say, to think of a beginning of time? These are the questions that are coming from philosophers. But the problems that are more troubling to cosmologists are coming from other cosmologists. The expansion of the universe has recently been observed in Scientific American and other journals to be accelerating. So not only did the Big Bang apparently start from a gigantic explosion, sending all the matter in the known universe away from itself, but that expansion seems to be getting faster and faster and faster. And there is no coherent explanation for why that would be, what the cause of that would actually be. And then there's this little problem of redshift. Now again, I'll descend into technical issues for just a moment. For those of you who know what redshift is, it's the mysterious reddening of light that we observe from distant cosmic objects, which is supposedly resulting because these objects are moving away from us very rapidly. Well, there are some serious problems in this body of evidence that are now coming to light. Let's talk about those for a minute. We believed that all the forces in the universe originated in this ultimate Big Bang, principally because of the redshifting in the spectra of light coming from distant objects. There are these highly redshifted objects out in space called quasars, these points of intense radiation, intense light across great distances of space. And these objects have very high redshifts. The presumption has been that these objects are flying away from us at incredible speeds, given birth perhaps just at the beginning of the birth of the universe. Well, the problem is that in the past couple of decades, high redshift distant quasars have now been observed to be emerging from low redshift nearby galaxies. So a spiral galaxy nearby has been observed to be ejecting from itself a high redshift quasar. That doesn't make sense. How can we have a high redshift object and a low redshift object together? Well, these observations are directly challenging the truth of the Big Bang hypothesis of creation. Indeed, the scientists who are making these observations are suggesting to us that quasars are in fact young galaxies, baby galaxies being born by older galaxies. And that redshift has another cause than recessional motion. In other words, if these scientists are right, the galaxies are not flying away from us. We've misinterpreted the evidence that has suggested to us that they are flying away from us. Redshift would appear to have a cause other than the galaxies flying away. Indeed, this may be the most fascinating of the conclusions that this new data suggests. Cosmos, our universe, may not be expanding at all, but rather it may be infinite and eternal. It may go on forever, and it may not have had a beginning, and it may not have an ending, but rather be infinite and eternal in time. Fascinating possibilities on which to speculate. Now, one of the things that this new body of evidence suggests to us is that galaxies may be very much more like organic living systems than we have previously thought. We sort of tend to think of galaxies, suns, and planets as inorganic, unliving, inert matter. Well, with this kind of perspective, seeing the birth of galaxies from older galaxies reminds us of the patterns that we see repeatedly through all forms of living systems here on Earth. Older beings giving birth to younger beings in perpetual cycles. These are interesting things to think about at the turn of a new millennium. So, where does this all lead? I've presented some interesting scientific ideas, but what does it have to do with the UFO phenomenon? Well, the point is this. The history of science it repeatedly has presented new sets of evidence that tend to overthrow previous assumptions on the nature of reality and the nature of the natural systems around us. I believe that in the next several decades, we will very likely have a complete mechanical understanding of physics. This more complete understanding of mechanical physics is likely to empower us with astonishing new capabilities. Capabilities that bear directly on the question of UFOs. Well, what are the possibilities? Well, there's a discipline of physics called electrodynamics, and I won't bother you with the details, but basically it says that force moving in fields of force, if you will, push, moving in fields of push, may offer a simpler model to explain everything that we see. That everything that we see in nature around us, everything that we are in terms of our physical forms, are made of this mysterious substance called force. That's what makes light, it's what makes atoms and electrons, and it's probably what makes UFOs as well. Indeed, where it all leads, I believe, is to astonishing new forms of energy and propulsion. The two basic requirements that precede our own creation of a starship. I believe that new forms of energy and propulsion are plausible, and that it is very possible we will discover these new understandings of science necessary to create them within the next few decades. So, what does this mean for our systems of belief? How is it possible to integrate the onrush of incredible new scientific knowledge with the systems of belief that have nourished and sustained human activity for thousands of years? I've tried to put together a diagram, and it's an oversimplification. It's very simple and not entirely accurate because of the simplification, but it's useful. And let me put it up on the screen here. I've described three different belief systems. Generally, the belief system of religion, the belief system of science, and then some combination of the two. There are countless books, many of which you've all read, that describe how science and spiritual traditions seem to be coming closer and closer together. Let's make a few observations on how these two belief systems are in fact touching each other now. Well, first point, the notion that our Creator is God. Religion would generally say that's true. Science would generally say that's false. And this new unitary perspective would say true. Next observation. Our Creator is the cosmos. We were created by the universe itself. Well, most religions would tend to say that's false. Science would say that's true. And the unitary perspective would say that's true. Third point, evolution is responsible for life on Earth. Now, on this point, religions are conflicted. Some say yes, that makes sense. Some say no. Of course, science says that's true. And the unitary perspective suggests, yes, that's true. Fourth point, some miracles, or in scientific terminology, anomalies, are in fact real. Some of them are real. Well, religion, of course, would say true. Science would typically say false. And the unitary perspective would say true. A miracle is a scientific process that we don't understand. Fifth point, higher powers of consciousness than those in the human being are in fact possible. In other words, the human does not necessarily have the most advanced form of consciousness possible in the universe. Seems like an obvious point, with which religions would tend to agree. Religions would say that's true. Science, many scientists would say, I'm not sure if that's true. That might be false. The unitary perspective would certainly say that's true. It's not reasonable to believe that human beings are the most advanced forms of life in the cosmos. Next point, Star Wars level technology, the kind of amazing discoveries that would make interstellar space travel not only possible but totally practical, could indeed have been attained somewhere in the cosmos. On some planet somewhere, they figured out how to build a starship that can travel between the stars. Religion has a question mark on that point, doesn't really know how to think about that question. Science says that's false. There is no way to do that in principle, and it never has been done anywhere in the cosmos. The unitary perspective would say science is likely wrong, that we've leaped to the conclusion that such wonders are impossible too quickly. Now the last point is an interesting one, and it's very controversial. The soul persists after death. Most religions would say that's true. Science would tend to say that's false. And the question mark you see there is really my own question mark. And I put a /true there because I believe that the answer to this question depends very much on the nature of the soul. What is it? What is the nature of the spirit that seems to live within each of our bodies? This is a question that I still study very, very, very deeply. And I haven't reached any conclusion of my own. Of course, each of us has to reach a conclusion on all of these questions on our own. Meanwhile, all the abstract theories aside, there are some facts about modern life that we all have to come to grips with. Earth today cannot support the existing footprint of humanity. The ways of modern civilization create so much waste across our planet's biosphere that we jeopardize the very existence of life on this world. An ancient tree of life is being hacked away by the machine of modern civilization. In English, I call this machine consumer idiotechnomics, or ideology plus technology plus economics together makes a machine. So I ask the question, what is the solution to reducing the footprint of humanity? How do we reduce the damage that we do to our biosphere? Of course, we all know that urban sprawl is spreading its tentacles across the planet as private property constricts access to the rest. I wonder how much of the experience of nature my grandchildren will be able to enjoy on present course and speed. Pulling the developing world out of depression through the stimulation of consumer growth magnifies these ecological problems. They're very serious challenges to deal with. And of course, we've all been confronted with the news stories in the past few years that describe how nationalism and bigotry are gaining access to every weapon system we've ever invented. And it seems that nationalism and bigotry and terrorism will gain access ultimately to every weapon system that we've ever invented. That's a pretty frightening prospect. So I ask the question, are there graduation tests for a species such as Homo sapiens in the cosmic evolutionary trajectory? Are there tests that we must pass in order to be able to deserve access to technologies like UFOs? Or are they too dangerous for us youngsters? So I would ask you to think about it in this way. Let's say, for the sake of discussion, that the unitary view is closer to the truth than the previous presumptions of religion and science. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that there is some truth to both perspectives in life. Then I believe it's possible to witness the birth of a new kind of spiritual science, what I call rational spirituality. There's a wonderful quote by my hero in life, Carl Sagan, that is the first sentence in his masterpiece, Cosmos. The first sentence began, "The cosmos is all that is." Of course, what does the Bible say? I am that I am. The difference between these two statements is whether you speak in the first person or not. The cosmos is all that is. I am that I am. We are all made of the cosmos. We are all made of that omnipresent being. Well, what is rational spirituality? Well, it's a system of belief in the integration of science, not in the reduction. It's not reductionist, but it's rather integrated. That's the true beauty in science. And this integration is not only useful for prediction, but it represents real and total unity of existence. You and I are actually one force being many, in many individuals, but we are connected to each other. We're part of each other. We are each other, living independent lives. Physical systems, stars, galaxies, planets, trees, and humans embody a universal consciousness that will connect us to all life forms, even the life forms that don't come from this planet. In this view, all things in nature experience emotion. Everything experiences emotion. Even the table that I touch here feels my hand. Of course, I am far more aware of that feeling than the table is. I'm a far more sophisticated being than the table. But the cosmos exists in all things, including inanimate things. And clearly, the pinnacle of the cosmic force is the force of love, the force of recreation, the force through which we create our own children, the force through which stars give birth to galaxies, perhaps the force that allows galaxies to give birth to new galaxies. There's a common thread that connects these forces together. Finally, diversity, in this view of spirituality, diversity is not to be fought. We're not to kill each other because we have differences of opinion, but rather we are to cherish our differences of opinion. We're to cherish all of our differences. Indeed, the difference is a gem to be worshipped, not to be fought. This is a new kind of unity between the spiritual mind and the rational mind. And it represents the kind of belief system that I have and the kind of belief system that I think is a growing force across humanity. If we're capable of adopting this type of mature worldview that respects both spiritual traditions and scientific knowledge, I believe a dazzling future may sweep into our lives. We may soon discover powers as fundamental as fire, where energy becomes free, where people will be free to move anywhere, where your garage has landing lights. With the internet and other new forms of communication, our ability to interact will be entirely democratic. The economic and environmental cost of living will drop nearly to zero. We can dramatically narrow the footprint of humanity on our biosphere and help restore the health of our planet. And the ultimate ocean, the ultimate frontier, would be opened to our ships, the frontier of space. You can even speculate so far as to say that cities could be built in the sky. With the kinds of powers of physics that I'm describing to you, indeed, that is not an outrageous concept. If we one day can influence the force of gravity, we can, in fact, build such wonders as floating cities that move about the earth. In any event, whether such exotic possibilities materialize or not, with these types of discoveries, civilization would evolve from top to bottom. And indeed, married with our discoveries of genetics and biology, our species itself would gain eternal life. The first species on our planet that we know of to gain eternal life would be the human species, if indeed we one day discover the means to travel beyond our planet. So let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that this view is closer to the truth than the existing worldviews. How would the systems of our planet evolve? How would the state of the world begin to shift if we taught and thought this way? We don't need to leap to conclusions that say, this is the theory or that is the theory. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that there is a new theory that would describe these possibilities better than our existing theories do, how would our world shift if we taught and thought this way? Well, I believe that several very important and urgently needed changes would begin to spread around the globe. The first is a shift in ethics. We would see the divine unity in all things. And this concept of unity would become an increasingly powerful thought shared by human beings around the world. Tolerance of difference would shift to worship of diversity. Transcendent moral principles of truth and love would be shorn, would be separated from moral baggage that, frankly, doesn't work very well anymore for modern civilization. It's very important that we distinguish between transcendent moral qualities that every religion agrees upon, truth and love, from local moral philosophies that are particular to individual communities. An important point, this pairing that we seem to see, at least in the United States, between sex and violence in entertainment and media, for example, would be divorced. They should have nothing to do with each other. The former should be cherished, and the latter recognized as a symptom of deeper problems. A shift in ethics gives birth to a shift in society. In the next slide. Our earthbound population growth would continue to slow, while the footprint of humanity is dramatically slashed. It's a good thing for our biosphere. But because of these new technologies, the need for us to work at the level that we do every day would be significantly reduced. At the very least, significantly shifted. In economics, an ethic of sportsmanship would replace the life and death competitive viciousness that seems to govern economics today in our society. Economics is viciously competitive today, and I'm not certain that that viciousness is healthy for our future. I believe that in the future, dramatic concentrations of profit will be seen as they are, shallow, stingy. At the same time, I believe that free markets will be the only markets there are, because freedom will be the only concept that governs society. I believe that in the next generation of human society, sharing will become an ultimate high, and a quality that is unlike no other, that is like no other in human experience. I believe that this transformation will include a shift in the way we govern ourselves. As the lone nut, the terrorist, becomes equipped to kill millions of human beings, the notion of gigantic militaries seems to be less and less relevant. When $100,000 can buy you a bioweapons lab today, how does the role of a $1 trillion military machine change? Might it be that the money that we invest in our militaries gives moral justification for the investment in military spending by other nations? This is a very important question. I need to speed up a little bit here because we're running out of time. But I do believe that the opening of the frontier of space will ultimately motivate national governments to empower a single global peacekeeping function. And as a step in this direction, I believe that our society should move towards voluntary demilitarization. And I believe that that should be led here in the United States. The U.S. spends more on its military than the rest of the Security Council nations combined. This, to me, makes no sense as we look to the third millennium. Change must be led here at home. I believe that economic and political power structures will begin to evolve away from systems of control and will become more and more reliant upon the ethics and thus the education of our citizens. It is vitally important that our education systems keep up with the change brought about by our science and technology. And I believe that a new and democratic service orientation will emerge from our governing bodies, continuing to serve the needs that free markets don't serve. Let's shift to the slide titled A Shift in Education. This is our second to last slide, so we're just about finished today. I believe that education is the only path to avoid mutually assured destruction. And particularly in this nation, which is experiencing perhaps the greatest economic boom in history, we should be very careful to reinvest our profits to those most important functions in society that will create peace in the third millennium. And I believe that the most important of those is education. Using tools of awesome power that are just now emerging, namely the internet, I believe that the world's best curriculum can be made free for every parent and child. Imagine that. Imagine what it means to be able to educate every single child with the world's best curriculum. That can be done within the next few decades. I believe that if we permit ourselves to think on a new scale as a society, a new diet of quality, well-informed entertainment can hit the big screen, the movie theaters, and the small screen on television. I'm not impressed with much of what we see from Hollywood today, but in a sense, we need to expand the limits of our thinking. And the UFO question is one of those dimensions that we must now consider. And let me return to this point again because it's so important. Transcendent ethical fundamentals of truth and love could be taught with less of the moral dogma and more of the unifying principles, the transcendent principles of truth and love, than they are taught today. And I think this question of the ethics that we choose to provide to our children is one of the most important questions that we can think about seriously as we envision the 21st century. In short, I believe that we will come to see that teaching individual responsibility is dramatically cheaper than enforcing it. It's dramatically cheaper than enforcing it. And with the new technologies that we have in our possession today, to say nothing of new forms of propulsion and energy, it's vital that we teach ethics and responsibility to our children. Otherwise, these new technologies will destroy us. And perhaps that's why it takes decades for the process of contact to unfold in a manner that does no harm to human society. Finally, a shift in living. I believe that in the next century, individuals will have total biotechnological power, essentially. And that possession of such awesome power will motivate us to unlock our doors in trust of each other one day again. I see no alternative. I believe that in this type of future, loving, teaching, learning, experiencing, and exploring what life has to offer will be our passions. I believe that in the third millennium, we will begin to explore the newly glimpsed faculties of consciousness. These will be the mysteries of the third millennium that will fascinate our scientists as questions of chemistry and biology have previous generations in this and previous centuries. And every child may in truth be told, one day you may go to the stars. What an inspirational possibility to be able to gift to a young boy or girl. That is the vision that I hope together we are able to realize. And I've dedicated my life to help make this happen. So with these thoughts, I'd like to bring my presentation to a close and take whatever few moments we have left for questions from the audience. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much. Did you hear that applause?
I did. Thank you very much.
Very good. It was really worth it. Thank you very much for a thoroughly view of the concept that is so important, and also to connecting all the different issues. And let me open the questions here with a question of my own.
Okay.
You are talking about the issue of free energy. In your
Yes.
opinion, that is vital for all the solutions that you have give us a glimpse of. And how long is it ahead until it is a really utilization of free energy, in your opinion?
There are several paths of promising research underway today. I would describe two of them briefly. One of them is commonly referred to as low-energy fusion or low-energy fission. We're still studying which of the two makes the most sense. This was popularly termed cold fusion in the past several years. When it was first announced in 1989, it was ridiculed, but I think that ridicule was grossly premature. There does indeed seem to be something very mysterious going on in electrolytic cells. Another, and perhaps more related to the question of UFOs, is several new concepts of electromagnetic energy production that are totally different than any type of energy system we have today. I believe that within the next 10 years, we will gain fundamental insights that will point the way to limitless clean sources of energy, not simply to fuel our automobiles and homes, but which will facilitate the creation of such wonders as starships.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes?
How do you get over the resistance from corporations, governments to these new technologies, because they don't want to give up their hold on their monopoly?
That's a wonderful question. It's not easy, let me put it that way. First of all, let me try to stress that I avoid demonizing any individual or any category of institution. Businesses today are run by us. They are us. They employ us, and they're an important part of the future. But it is certainly true that particularly business leaders must look beyond their own pocketbooks, must look beyond their own organization's historical path to profitability, and look to the interests that serve humanity as a whole. I believe that because of the difficulty in looking beyond individual profits, that the greatest discoveries in energy are not likely to come from Shell Oil or Amoco or Chevron. They might, but I don't think they will. I think they will come from a half a dozen very talented small research laboratories whose scientists have dedicated their lives to unlocking these secrets.
Thank you very much. Here's another one.
Joe, this is Jaime Maussan. I am an investigator in Mexico, and I'd like to know if you believe that the energy of these objects or it's related to the presence of volcanoes, active volcanoes, and active faults, because we have seen that most of these sightings appear close to volcanoes, close to mountains, or close to active faults like the San Andres Fault, also in Mexico.
Well, there are two schools of thought. First, the school of thought that I would disagree with suggests that UFOs are natural geologic products from volcanoes, some kind of energetic projectile from volcanoes or active faults. It may be true that some heretofore unknown electrical phenomena does in fact emerge and have been from time to time misinterpreted as UFOs, but the hypothesis that I would prefer to believe, based upon the evidence that I've studied, is that these craft, for some reason, tend to have an interest in the geologic activities of Earth. That seems reasonable to me. It seems rational and somewhat believable. But I find it very hard to equate the sighting of a silver metallic disk with some kind of swamp gas from a volcano.
Thank you.
Joe, Dr. Richard Boylan here in Oslo with a question for you.
Hello, Richard.
Hi, nice to meet you via video. Hope to do it in person soon. You broke on the American consciousness scene with using some of the wealth from your very successful computer corporation, software corporation, for humanitarian purpose of education, full-page ad in USA Today, newspaper, interviews on NBC, I believe, other televisions and media in general, affirming UFO reality and putting the weight of your corporate presence and your wealth behind this as a reality. Given the blockade in the US and some other countries to dealing with this subject voluntarily in a respectful and a way that takes it seriously and brings the evidence forward, are you prepared with your resources to again, perhaps, so to speak, buy your way into the media to allow this information to come forward?
That's a very good question, a fair question, Richard. Stepping down from US Web a year and a half ago was a very painful process for me. It damaged the company, it certainly damaged me, but as I'm sure you can appreciate, Wall Street back then at least didn't particularly smile on its CEOs believing in little green men. So the past year and a half I have indeed tried to invest every waking moment that I can to this very complex set of issues that I've described for you today. I would stress to you that my approach to this is not simply to, pound my fist on the table and say, release the files on UFOs. That's a fair point for many to take, but I prefer to spend my time and my money right now on actual science progress on the underlying physics and energy, propulsion and energy related questions. Because if we can ourselves actually understand the physics that would make a UFO possible for us to construct, well then we've actually sort of gone beyond all questions of cover-up and concealment, and we've gone literally to the point of being able to construct new forms of starships ourselves. That's priority number one for me. Priority number two, a close second, is the kind of sponsoring the kind of rich science education that I believe the public needs to focus on now. After all, if we are seriously confronted with the possibility of being an interstellar species in the 21st century, I would say that it's a really high priority that we all bone up on our science. Everybody knows my position on releasing whatever information is presently held behind locked doors. I believe that it's time for the governments of our planet to share with the public whatever they have and whatever they know. It's overdue, and we really do need this wake-up call in order to avoid the crises that I've described today.
Thank you so much. Here's another one.
My name is Erling Strand, and I'm a leader of the Hestan project. I don't know if you have heard about the Hestan project. It's a place in Norway where a lot of UFOs has shown up for several years. And I would like to hear your comments or your thoughts about putting instrumentation up in such places. It's not only Hestan, it's other places in the world too. And it could be a way to gather data which could put more lights on this phenomenon. What do you think about that?
I would endorse strongly the organization of a global system of some kind of data acquisition that would allow us all to better track the statistics of this phenomenon. I am aware of several such initiatives. Some of them are public, some of them are private in various countries that are attempting to do what you describe, and I strongly endorse the efforts to do so. I think we will learn a lot if we could integrate a global view of this aerial phenomenon.
Thank you very much. And we have put all the data onto web too. So we have a small setup now with one camera which automatically trigger and put the data onto the web. And the web address is hestan.hoeuf.no. I can send it to you later. So thank you.
Thank you.
More questions? Okay, Mr. Joe Firmage, I'm very grateful for your efforts, what you have invested in time and money for being here in this particular way, and being unable to see Norway this time. I will bring some gifts from here via Tony back to you, enabling you to be wanting to come here another time. So thank you for being with us. Have a good day.
Have a good day, everybody, and keep the faith. I think we're coming close to a time when important discoveries will be shared.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.